Hello, welcome and good afternoon to everyone that's filing in right now. We're going to give it just a few moments to let other folks come on into the chat and log in and everything. So just a moment and we will get started. And as I like to say, it gives you a few moments to take a look at the slide. Okay, all right, so again, welcome. My name is Jenna Quinn, and it's my pleasure as the Assistant Director of Alumni Engagement to welcome you all to this 49er Industry Chat. So before we start, I have just a couple of housekeeping items. We're just going to inform you that this session is being recorded. And the great part about that is that it's going to be available for you on demand and the folks who weren't able to log in live. And it's going to be available at www.csulb.edu/alumni. For those of you who are able to join us in person today, thank you very much. And we encourage you to go ahead and submit any questions that you have for our guest speaker today into the Q&A box. And don't wait till the end. Just go ahead and when the question pops into your mind, pop it into the Q&A box. And now it's my great pleasure to introduce Lupita Baragan. She's an MFA student here. And Lupita, please take it away.
Thank you so much. Hi, my name is Lupita and I am an MFA student at CSULB. I am working in the fiction section and I'm also doing research that deals with metaphors and medical rhetoric and definitely informing my creative writing with the research that I'm doing. I'm really excited to introduce Max Evans. He is a native son of Long Beach who graduated with a BA in psychology and an MFA in fiction from CSULB. For his debut novel, Escape to Butterfly Avenue, he creates a genre in fiction called remix fiction, which incorporates adaptations of hip-hop songs and blends them into narrative structure of a novel. Evans is an award-winning author whose poetry and short stories have been anthologized. Very excited to talk to you today, Max. How are you doing?
Lupe, thank you very much. Thanks for having me here.
Great. Well, first of all, I would love to hear about your journey to get to CSULB. Like, what made you choose that campus, and what was your experience like there?
Okay, so yeah, I grew up in Long Beach. I've been here my entire life. Grew up in the Wrigley section, and then I attended Long Beach City College, and then after that I transferred to Long Beach State, and I earned a BA in psychology, and then after that I came back, I think about 6-7 years later, and entered the MFA program, and same as you, and in the fiction department. And so really, I mean, the question was, why Long Beach State? I mean, besides the fact that it's an amazing school, my dad went there as well. And, it was close as well. My son was born when I was like 22. He's now 23. And so at the time, that was the best option, especially for an MFA program, because it was in the, my backyard.
Yeah, wow, that's great. And what was your experience like there? I know you mentioned you were in the fiction program. Just like what were your interests while you were there? What were some of the really great opportunities that you had?
Yeah, so for me, when I entered the MFA program, I was just strictly like really into short story form. And I really was intrigued by the dirty realists from the 80s. And for those that don't know, like dirty realism is from the 80s. It's a minimalist approach. And the writers focus on everyday writers, or everyday Americans. And they used everyday language, which was something that really interested me, because I'm not really a fan necessarily of fantasy and sci-fi. So I like things that are more, you could say, more real. But again, they talked about just what everyone went, I guess around me was going through. So like middle class struggles like job loss and paying the rent on time and raising kids and broken cars. And that attracted me more than fantasy or something from the 1800s. So yeah, so I ended up going to Long Beach State for the MFA program. And luckily, again, I was so much into short stories. It allowed me to read other texts that I would never pick up. So for example, like I read some poetry collections, which was not my thing, but they were amazing, as well as, you know, nonfiction and even novels. Again, I wasn't that much into novels at that time. So it definitely allowed me to read some cool stuff. And then I had some really good instructors as well that were very influential into my work later on, such as Bill Moore, who's more on the poetry side. He was on my panel. And also the late, great Gerald Lachlan.
Awesome. So great to hear about all of those things. And here, like the familiar professors, I think I got one of, because the late Lachlan, he just has a foundation and he's like still they're still like contributing money to MFA students. So it's great to hear about your experiences with them. I know you mentioned you weren't into novels in the beginning, which is really intriguing considering that you have a debut novel. So can you tell us a little bit about how you got there and what that process was like?
Yeah, so let me back it up a little bit. So after my MFA program, I graduated. I mean, I published a novel, a short story collection, and I'll show it real quick to the screen real quick.
Awesome.
This is called Where's Pops? And it's based off my MFA thesis, which was just called Pops at the time. The short story collection focuses exclusively on fathers as central characters, the first of its kind. And from its sales, I still pay for a scholarship for students attending local community colleges that are fathers. And so again, the short story form was my thing, but the hard part, the realization that I gained from it afterwards was the fact that short story collections don't sell. And so I had heard that before and I kind of just forged through and I'm just going to do this, but that's basically all I knew. So after publishing Where's Pops, it was that realization, okay, got to move forward and consider a novel. And so I struggled because I had seen so many people write novels or take 15 years to write a novel in some of my writing groups. And I was just very terrified of the whole process. But I ended up reading this book here, which kind of changed things for me. And this book is called Lit Riffs. And it's a collection of short fiction by various authors, and the stories are based on songs, their favorite songs. Okay, so when I read that, I thought it was really cool. It was interesting how some authors would focus really on, you know, word for word from the original text. Others just kind of took it as a theme and ran with it. Okay, and then I just started thinking about, well, how could I, you know, do this, and how could I do the same thing but make it into a novel? And that's when I had the idea of putting a bunch of hip hop songs together into a novel itself. And so I could probably talk about the process now or talk about it later or whatever.
That was my follow-up. So yes, that'd be great.
Okay, so so the process was, what I originally did is I created a long, extensive list of different hip hop songs that already had narratives within them. Okay, so it basically had a beginning, a middle, and an end, and wasn't necessarily the braggadocious type of material where it's all focused on self and, you know, and that's it. But these actually had stories within them. And then what I had to do is select a few songs, and basically it played like a narrative, like storyline Tetris, and started putting, you know, one song next to the next one and figuring out how could I make them connect, and was able to finally make an outline for the novel itself. And it came out to be 12 songs total. The date range goes from songs from like as far back as 93 And probably the more recent one was like 2006. So it kind of shows like where I was in regards to hip hop and what I liked, and that's definitely the golden era. But okay, so I even at the same time while I was creating like the outline, etc., and doing the rough draft, I always put pictures on the front of my my notepads, and I'm see we see that pretty well. But this was like the original kind of title and idea for it, and so it was a little bit different. It was called Escape to Butterfly Ave, and then the subtitle was Devin's Mixtape Reality. And because I wanted the readers to understand earlier that it was basically all these songs put together, and that kind of kept me going. That picture right there. I had this idea for about 3 years before I actually started writing the chapters themselves. And a few months later, the pandemic occurred, and suddenly found myself at home a lot more than I'd ever been at home before. And so I also took a novel course at Long Beach City College, with someone who I think is the best creative writing instructor in Long Beach, and his name is Darren Smoley. And so that really helped me, because short stories, you just write them and then you're done. But with a novel, you have to figure out how to connect them with your transitions and how to connect symbols throughout the entire text. And he had all these great practices that helped me with that transition from being a short story writer to a novelist. And then let's see. Some things that I learned while I was creating this novel is that initially I was trying to stay true to the text, the original text, as much as possible. But then I realized as the chapters went on, I couldn't do that anymore, because if I stayed true to the original text in, say, chapter 7, it was taking away from the narrative of my novel. So that was something that I definitely learned as I went along. And for example, there's one chapter, and it's based on an Eminem song. And the song is called Bonnie and Clyde 97. Now, if you don't know this song is about basically his alter ego, Slim Shady, who kills his baby's mama and has her in a trunk, okay, basically. And he's talking to his daughter in the front seat. So when I recreated that chapter specifically, I scared, or the main character scared a lot of some of the readers off, to the point they didn't want to read anymore. So I realized, okay, I can't stay true to the text. I have to make sure that they understand that this is not the character, but like just he's frustrated at the time, and it was just a quick vision that he had. And so so those are some of the parts of the process that I learned. But then above and beyond that, in contrast to my first book, I formatted everything myself. I published it by myself without the aid of a publishing company. And I did that so that that it could be available anywhere online. And also I learned that when you go through a publishing company, they're going to take half of your money. And so this time around, I was like, no, I'm going to hold on to whatever I can hold on to. So yeah, I definitely learned a lot in the process, not only with the book itself, but also the writing world.
So while you were doing this, because you were writing, but then you were also publishing that, were you working another job, or were there other things going on that you had to juggle simultaneously?
Yeah, so initially I was teaching at community colleges. And when I actually started writing the text, I was a full-time instructor at a local community college. And so, I couldn't, there was no way to write during that time when I was teaching full time. Maybe a little bit in the summer, but at the same time I was teaching summer classes. So that was one of the biggest hurdles for sure, was just getting the time together. A long time ago, this reminds me of when I was at Long Beach State getting my BA, there was a guest speaker similar to myself. And she said, when you write, you need to get a job that doesn't consume your mind as much. Mm. And I just remember hearing that and going, yeah, but you sound weak. I was thinking, you don't have it, you don't have enough energy or whatever to do that. You're weak. And then I learned the hard way that no, she was absolutely right. To have a job where you're teaching or in charge, you're a manager of a large group of people, it takes so much out of you that when you get down to it, writing is just becomes like the last thing on your plate. So, but then, yeah, when the pandemic occurred, I still had multiple jobs at the time, but again, I was at home. And also I work as a casual longshoreman for the port too. So that was like another way to get money and, also, yeah, make time for writing too.
Great. And then we have a question here from the audience. Where does your love of hip hop come from? And could you share more about how that genre has influenced your writing?
Definitely. All right. So, like I went to like high school in the mid 90s, and that's basically called the golden era of hip hop. And the reason they call it the golden era is because that's the time frame in which the overall per MC, per line, per song, per lyric, it was overall the highest in creativity, consciousness, and skill that we've seen overall. Okay, so some groups that really influenced me is this one right here. You can see how old this is Public Enemy, Fear of a Black Planet. And you can even see there's a parental advisory sticker before it became like the actual one that people use all the time on their CDs. But Public Enemy really taught me that you utilize your words to make influences on society and not just necessarily on yourself. And so again, it became like this huge influence in regards to my writing, where I'm like, okay, when I put out a short story collection, like how can I make my community better through my words? And so that was a huge influence. And then when we talked about high skill level consciousness and creativity, this was really influenced. This is Gangstar, Daily Operation. Okay. Again, the MC high skill level, the DJ Premier high skill level, and they really had a really tight focus on improving their community. And that's where this whole idea of keep it real comes from, where you're able to do all these things at a high level. When the mid 90s occurred, that's when sales and hip hop surpassed all other music forms. In the past, like 7 years prior to that, like say prior to 97, there was no hip hop section at the record store when there was record shops. It was always tossed between all these other like gospel or R&B. But at that point, when it reached that height financially and made more money, the whole idea of keeping it real, again, being creative, being conscious, and having a high skill level declined. And so I found myself really hungry to find something else that would fulfill me as the golden era had. And that's when I started turning towards writing. I didn't really write until I was like 19, 20, something along that lines. And again, that's when I found the dirty realist writers. Like some names that come to mind are Richard Ford and Tom Jones, T-H-O-M Jones. And what was interesting, that writer, Tom Jones, actually came to Long Beach State and snuck into one of my English classes. And it was just the coolest thing to actually meet somebody who was so good at what he did in the form that I loved. And so, so I then started that's when I started focusing more on the short stories or fiction and books themselves, just because hip hop had suddenly dropped off in regards to, basically how real it was. And then I'll add one more thing to that. Another author that I want to mention too in regards to realism is this author here, Junette Diaz, short story collection called Drown. He talks about Dominican American family, New Jersey, who are adjusting to life here in the U.S. And for me, what it did, this book here, it basically combined Raymond Carver, but with a more urban type flavor to it. And that's when I really thought, okay, I definitely have something coming from Long Beach, coming from West Side, coming from a multicultural family where my mom's Salvadoran, speaks fluent Spanish, and she married technically my stepdad, but I call him my dad, who when I was 2 years old, and he's Black. And so it just it gave me like this lane where I'm like, okay, I can definitely find my place in writing.
That's awesome. When you first started talking about your interest, Diaz instantly came to mind just because of what he writes about and the way that he writes it. And it made me think about, so when you're working with these songs from like you said, the golden age of hip hop, like how do you put that in a novel? Like not just the, like the stories themselves, because I know you said you work with songs that have narrative, but what about like the sounds and some of that? Like does some of your form mirror, or how do you try to incorporate the overall, I don't know, like the flavor of the song into your writing?
Yeah, and it was a huge challenge because of the fact, kind of like separately from that, but each of them have their own kind of flavor as well. True. And that was a hard part to blend the voice of the main character, but based upon each of these different songs by different artists. So how did I blend it necessarily? I would break down each story into sections, and I got better at this as I figured this as I went along. I would break each song into like 5 sections. And then I would figure out, okay, what's most important from each of those sections in the narrative, in an attempt to incorporate them. Now, of course, the other thing, this is like a branch of fan fiction. And so, there's definitely that, you definitely have to change it up so that you don't have your stuff, basically sued. And so a lot of it was, extending, like if they had a metaphor in the song, extending the metaphor and giving it more meat to that metaphor. Instead of it just being one line, now that line has been extended to 2 or 3 paragraphs. Mm. So that was one way. And also just trying to slide in a few details here and there about the artists within the songs themselves, or within the stories. So yeah, definitely the challenge of it was very high. It's a high level of challenge text. It's not so straightforward like boy meets girl kind of thing, like there's a lot more to it. And that's one of the reasons why I, created this genre called remix fiction, just because it was such a challenge and it wasn't something that was just going to be super easy to do. And I'm really happy with it, with the fact that even if you don't know the songs, it doesn't matter at all, because of the fact that the story itself is its own thing. I would say it may help, like for readers that do know the songs, they'll be, it'll intrigue them as well, but it's not necessary to know the songs themselves.
So awesome. Here's another one from the audience that kind of goes into your creative process. So they want to know, as a novelist, what does your typical day look like? And do you write every day, or how would you describe your creative process? Good.
Yeah, great question. I need to have time to write. And basically, if I don't have time to write, I just don't. I know a lot of people will say, write 1,000 words a day or something like that. I think that's important when you're more so a younger writer and you're still trying to figure out your style and your voice. But as you move along, you kind of have that under your belt. And so I don't do the 1,000 words a day type of thing, because I feel like it's just, I'm not going to be, my concentration won't be there at all. And so, I see all these people like, oh, write 2,000 words a day. Okay. But if out of those 2,000 words, only 50 of the words out of the 2,000 are hot or effective, that's not that good. It's more important to have days where you write literally 1,000 hot words. I call it hot right now. That's more important than just trying to write, just to write. That doesn't make sense to me. So that's one thing. So having the free time. And so even when I was working full time as an instructor, I would try to find certain weekends, like on a 3-day weekend, and I would extend it into a 4-day weekend, take an extra day off. And so I would just basically, before that 4-day weekend began, and it was devoted to writing, I would do everything to have my laundry done, my food shopping done, tell people that were close to me, no, I'm not going to hang out this weekend, and make it really exclusive to that, so that I could get to that place of, hitting flow with my writing. And so, yeah, that was a big part of it. And then during the pandemic, it became the opposite. I had too much time. And what I discovered too is people always say, well, if I just had more time, I could write a novel. That's not necessarily true either. They say like 98% of people who start novels never finish them. So just having all the time in the world is not everything. I think you have to have a lot of skill before going into a novel. And so I suggest writing short stories first. So yeah, that kind of answered that question, but not fully. Hopefully that was enough.
Great. And then how would you say is the process for writing a novel from coming up with the idea to actually going and publishing in the book? So like basically, what does it look like from that initial spark to like getting it out there?
Yeah, I think about like composition class where you talk about doing free writes and all that stuff. And I think for me, the free write portion was just coming up with all these different songs that had narratives, and then selecting them. And then before writing the actual novel, for each chapter, make a very strong, not necessarily outline, but almost like a strong summary of the entire novel per chapter. And that will really help you to understand how things will connect later on. That's my approach. Other people are different. They just start writing and they just figure it out as they go along. I do that to a certain extent, but from the very beginning, no, I need to know what I'm writing. So yeah, having a good summary of your novel will really help out. And then again, chopping it up into like 5 sections per chapter, that'll be more fulfilling, because instead of being frustrated that you didn't finish a chapter today, you could say, well, I did finish that part 2 of the chapter today. And you won't feel as upset because you didn't finish the whole chapter today. But you did get something done. And then it just takes a lot of time, and having really good readers as well is beneficial. So as you go through your writing career, in your writing groups, your writing classes, hold on to a few of those ones that really had good insight into what you were writing. Yeah.
Oh, and that speaks to something that is also being asked. Did you have any of your mentors from CSULB helping you to become that writer? And I mean, did you reach out to any of them specifically, like while you were working on your novel, to be possible readers?
Yeah, I'm trying to think. Not during the process, but afterwards, I reached out to one instructor, and unfortunately, he just didn't have the time. I really wanted something that was more polished when sharing with him or with someone from the program. So I did reach out, and it didn't necessarily happen, but I did reach out to writers who, when I first started at the Long Beach Writers Group, this was years ago, I reached out to some writers there. I also reached out to some writers from different classes that I've taken. So not necessarily Long Beach States, but yeah, I did reach out to other writers.
And have you found it easy to form a community of writers in Long Beach? Like I know you've mentioned being a part of different programs, and then there's also like a lot of authors around. So how do you go about forming that community yourself?
Right. Yeah. So I started during the pandemic something called Long Beach Writer. And if anybody's got the phone nearby, just IG Long Beach Writer with underscores. And I started that as a way to promote other writers. And so whenever someone has anything published, or someone even has someone write a nice comment on their work, or they have a reading coming up, anything to do with writing and Long Beach, I promote on Long Beach Writer. So that's been my way to, connect with local writers. And again, I think about Gerald Laughlin. I kind of feel like I'm in some ways continuing that tradition, because he was, for those that don't know, was like, he'd been teaching and doing poetry since the 60s and was friends with Bukowski, etc. But so he was, well known and put out numerous books, but he was so supportive of anybody in Long Beach that, was into writing or outside of Long Beach. And so I don't know the story to be true, but I know it happened one way or another. I guarantee that there was someone who wrote one poem and then they were going to go read it at a coffee shop, and they invited Lachlan. I guarantee he made it. He would do whatever he could to support local writers. And so with my first book, I found promotion to be the hardest component to the whole process of getting your book out there. So that's why I started Long Beach Writer. And so even like last night, I went to a silent Long Beach reading club online, and there weren't that many people there, but still I enjoyed like meeting with people who are readers. So online for me has become the thing. I'm starting to expand to all the other types of social medias now. It's so different. As a writer in today's world, it's such an incredibly different experience, because you need to connect with others in your local community, but also outside. And that's going to include buying like a microphone at some point, or buying, a green screen, which I haven't used yet, and buying lighting and all this stuff. It's such a weird thing in comparison to how it used to be. But these are the ways now that you can connect with your fellow writers in your area.
Yeah, the way we connect has essentially changed, and that's no different as a writer. I completely agree. So why did you feel like you needed an MFA, or what made you pursue an MFA in the first place?
Okay, that's a great question. When I read that book, Drowned by Junot Diaz, that's where I really switched it up, because my BA was in psychology and I was working a few jobs in the field. And that's where I was really like, okay, I need to go for this. And so I saw his trajectory where he published this book, Drown, and then it became well known after his MFA program. I forgot which one it was, but and I thought, admittedly, I thought that was just how it goes. You graduate from an MFA program, and then you put out a hot book and everyone knows you. So I was definitely influenced by that. Let me hear that question again, because I know there's a part that I missed.
Yeah, what made you feel like you needed an MFA, or why did you decide to pursue an MFA?
Right. So that was like the main thing. I thought that was the process, and you go on and you just write a bunch of novels, etc. An MFA, like my feelings on MFAs have changed as time has gone on. I think some MFA programs haven't quite evolved to what the reality is. And the reality is that a majority of MFA students, when they come out, are not going to be published by a major publishing house. Okay. And so a lot of MFA programs are still pretending as if, yeah, you will, but it's not necessarily the truth now. And so that's why like my opinion of it has changed. And I just feel that if MFA program, if you ask them, well, do you teach me how to self-promote my work? And they say no, that's not a good sign. Or, just small things like, how do I put a barcode on the back of my novel? Things like that. How do I create a cover for my novel? If those answers keep coming up as no in support, I don't put as much value upon it now. Okay, it's good in getting you ready for your rising action and all the basics of writing, but in regards to long term, I wouldn't suggest it unless your schools are really helping you with that component with self-promotion.
Great answer. Thank you so much for that insight. And how much time do you find to read others' work while you're in the process of writing your own novel?
That's a good one. Yeah, I'm like a spurt type of reader where I'll read a lot and then just stop. So it really just depends on where I am in the process. I noticed as I got towards the end, in the last few chapters, I just couldn't read anybody else's stuff. I either felt like I was taking in their voice too much for a minute. And then there was another writer that was so good that it like kind of freaked me out a little bit. Like, why am I doing this? I can't compare to this person or whatever. So I kind of I had to stop. But yeah, I noticed towards the beginning, I read more of other people's work. I read some books that I had read before, new stuff. But then towards the end, it was like, all right, we got to get this done. And so as you get towards the end, I think you start reading less of other people's work for sure.
Nice. And then back to publishing, are there other ways to self-publish besides using Amazon?
Yeah, there's, wow, let me think of it. Ingram Spark. Ingram Spark is where you go to submit your work. And from Ingram Spark, you can have your work sold by not only Amazon, but also Barnes and Noble and all the other distributors. And that's an important question. And that's something that I learned. I was originally going to put my book solely on Amazon. It's a very easy process on Amazon too, by the way, in regards to formatting. But then I realized, okay, if I go through Amazon and then I try to, walk over to Barnes and Noble and say, hey, will you sell my book? They're going to go, absolutely not, because that's our direct competitor. So yeah, going through Ingram Spark is the way to go if you want it to be, available at Target or Walmart, etc. The bigger spots. So yeah, definitely that's what I'd say about that one. Mm-hmm.
Oh, thank you for that.
Yeah.
And then are you working on anything now that you've completed that project? Do you have any ideas brewing, or are you actually in the process of anything new?
Yeah, so one that I would like to do would be called B-Side Champions. And it would be me basically reverting to the short story form, but still focusing on different hip hop songs. And so I'm thinking about that one. And then I have a longer text that I work on every now and then called the 5-Man Weave. And it's a basketball text based on long-term friendships. And so right now, a lot of the promotion of this book right now is soaking all the time from actually being able to write. And as an independent writer, that's what it takes, is a lot more, reaching out to others rather than a big company reaching out for you. So yeah, right now I'm not writing as much, but those are what will be held in the future.
Yeah, we'll definitely be looking out for those. And is there anything that you would like to share with us? Any closing thoughts that you would like to leave us with, or anything that you feel like that we didn't ask and you would like to share?
Yeah, be cocky. So
I love that.
be cocky. And so what I mean by that is, throughout the process, it's just natural that you will have a lot of people that will not believe in you. Okay. So I know that when I had a BA in psychology and I wanted to enter the MFA program at Long Beach State, tons of people were like, you're not an English major, you're not going to get in, and so there was that. I think about in graduate school, I actually did a little experimentation with hip hop and fiction, and it was my last short story that I would ever put into the MFA program. And what I did is I took sections of different short stories and I placed them together, the small chunks of them, in order to make a brand new short story. And people weren't really sure how to take it, but there were other people who were like, I'm embarrassed to be in a program with someone who would submit something like that. I got a B in creative writing, my only B in creative writing ever. And, those types of experiences, I just had to be cocky and be like, no, I know I have something within me and I'm going to keep going. And so that's my thing. It's not like being abrasively cocky against other people, not like that, like F your stuff. It's not that. It's just knowing that, you have that feeling in your chest that you can do it, and you just keep following that rather than what other people say.
I love that. I have another question here. What made you get into writing and switch gears from a psychology degree?
That's a good question. So I always liked words, and I always liked writing, but it really wasn't until that Junot Diaz novel or collection where I was like, okay, I see how I can use my experiences in writing towards books. And also, it's probably within the blood. My biological father is also named Max Evans. He was famous in the Western genre. And he, for some of the older readers in the group, he wrote the TV show and the movie called The Rounders. And this was back in the 60s. And so even though I had nothing in regards to interaction with him, still those writing genes still kicked in. And also, the whole idea of like not having I always had a dad in the house, but not my biological father. That influenced me as well to write about father issues, something that a lot of people just kind of, go right by. And so that whole experience too gave me a focus that I wouldn't have had unless it was for that experience. So, basically taking something negative to positive.
I just thought of a question that I would love to hear your answer. You do have that BA in psychology. Do you see that inform your work as you took all of these years and all of these different classes? Like, how do you see that coming into your writing process and your writing in general?
Yeah, there's a lot of psychologists, they're big into writing themselves, writing works. I think it definitely, psychology allows you to look at an individual for their specific components, and you try to figure out what makes them tick, in regards to maybe your characters or whatever. And it also gives you valuable skills like just basic active listening, rather than just kind of passing through the day and never listening to what anybody says. You from psychology, you get great active listening skills to hear people for who they are. So I think that was a definite contributor to the writing. And psychology, if you look at it, especially when it comes to therapy, really what you're doing is just trying to understand somebody's story. So it's a lot of the similar type of skill set, understanding that individual's story and helping them to alter their story and change it for the better.
Great. I just got another question here. Everyone always thinks they can write a book. What do you suggest someone does to see if they have what it takes? Does it start with just having a desire to write, or do you have to love reading or a love of words? Like, what would you suggest?
Yeah, reading, super important, because you have to get different types of models to follow. And that's what really reading is. You figure out how other people put their work together. Like I say, yeah, you know what? I just lost my train of thought. What was that last part again?
What are your suggestions for someone who thinks that they want to write a book?
Oh yeah.
What does it take?
So the other thing too is just like basketball, you start with a layup and then you go to a free throw, to a mid-range, to a three-pointer. The same thing you want to do with writing. You want to start out with, typically, this is the typical pattern. You start with poems, then you go to short stories, then you go to novels. And I think that's one thing where a lot of students struggle, because they go for the Steph Curry three-pointer right out the gate, and they keep missing, and they keep missing, and it gets to the point where they're like, yeah, I'm done. So build up those initial skills and build up to the larger skills. And another thing I'll add too, I've taught creative writing. One thing that's interesting about younger writers now is the focus on typically on fantasy works, right, of all levels. Fantasy is probably one of the hardest texts to write, especially for a novel. You're doing so much more work. And I see students continually getting frustrated because they can't make this brand new world up, but that's because they haven't gotten the other skills first that precede that. So, you know, again, start out smaller and then build up as you go along.
Oh, those are some great tips. Thank you so much for that. Let me see if there's anything else. I think that's it. Jenna, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you both so much. Yeah, we just want to thank you so much, Lupita and Max, for just a very engaging conversation. I know that I certainly learned a lot, and I'm not even in the MFA field, so I thought that was just absolutely wonderful. And we'd also like to thank our audience for attending today. I invite you all to visit our website and to follow us on social media. So that way you can learn all about all our other alumni programming and get involved. So just want to say thank you so much. And, you know, Max, if you could stay on the line with us for a bit. Just thank you everyone so much, and I hope you all have a great day.